They called my grandma useless. Her own children, my mother and uncles, treated her like a burden, and her voice was ignored in her own home. But what they didn't know was that the woman they mocked would one day save us all. But before I continue, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Your support helps us share more stories of betrayal, family drama, and the sweet taste of karma. Alright, here's my story. My name is Vera. I'm 28 years old, and this story is about my grandmother, Evelyn. She's 72, a woman who has lived through wars, raised 4 children, worked 2 jobs most of her life, and still somehow managed to keep her faith in kindness. She's the kind of woman who knows how to stretch a dollar, how to fix a torn shirt with just a needle and thread, and how to comfort you with nothing more than a warm cup of tea and a quiet smile. But to my family, to her own children, she was outdated. They acted like she had nothing to offer. I grew up watching the way my mom and uncles treated her. Every time she tried to give advice, they brushed her off with rolled eyes and condescending laughs. "Mom, you don't understand how things work now. Just let us handle it. You're too old to get it. Honestly, why don't you just rest instead of worrying about everything?" It was constant. At family gatherings, my grandma would try to join conversations, but they'd talk right over her. Sometimes she'd repeat herself, hoping to be heard, but no one ever acknowledged her words. She'd just fall silent, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes fixed on her plate while the rest of us laughed and gossiped around her. The worst part? They joked about her behind her back. I remember one night after dinner, I overheard my uncle saying, "She just likes to act like she knows everything. Truth is, she's useless now. Can't even walk without complaining." My mom laughed and agreed. I wanted to scream at them, to defend her, but I bit my tongue. I was younger then, still living under my parents' roof, and too afraid to speak against the adults. But inside, it burned me. Because I knew they were wrong. I knew my grandma wasn't useless. She was the only one who actually saw what was happening in our family. She noticed how my uncle was spending money recklessly, buying new gadgets every month while his bills piled up. She saw how my mom was hiding financial struggles from my dad, quietly juggling credit card debt she didn't want anyone to know about. She even saw how my cousins were getting into the wrong crowd, slipping into habits that could easily ruin their futures. Grandma Evelyn tried to warn them. She'd say, "You can't keep spending money like this. Hard times don't knock before they enter," or "Secrets will poison a family faster than any illness." But they'd just laugh at her, muttering, "There goes Mom again, acting like she knows everything." It broke my heart to watch her treated that way. Sometimes I'd sit with her in the evenings, just to keep her company. She'd sip her tea slowly, staring out the window, and say in her soft voice, "Vera, they think I'm useless. But time will show them otherwise." I didn't understand what she meant then. I thought it was just her way of comforting herself. But now, looking back, I realize she had already seen the storm forming on the horizon. One evening stands out in my memory. We were having a family dinner, one of those big gatherings where everyone came together under one roof. The mood was loud and chaotic, with my uncles bragging about their jobs, my mom pretending everything was perfect, and my cousins glued to their phones. Grandma tried to speak up. She gently reminded everyone about the importance of saving money, about preparing for the unexpected. She said, "Life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. Better to be ready than sorry." Nobody listened. My uncle chuckled and said, "Mom, we're not living in your old days. The world is different now." Even my mother smirked and added, "Honestly, you should just relax. We've got this under control." But I saw the way Grandma's eyes dimmed as she sank back into her chair. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even hurt anymore. She was resigned, like she had heard these dismissive words so many times, they no longer surprised her. Still, I could see something in her expression. A quiet strength. A patience that felt almost unsettling, as if she was simply waiting for the day they'd realize how wrong they were. And that day was closer than any of us realized. Because within a few months, everything we thought was secure in our family started crumbling. My uncle's reckless spending caught up to him. The bills he had been hiding finally came due. My mother's financial secrets began spilling into the open. The arguments between siblings grew louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. And through it all, Grandma sat silently, watching. That was when I began to realize the truth. The woman they had called useless wasn't useless at all. She was the only one who saw clearly. The only one who had been paying attention. I didn't know it then, but the collapse of our family was only the beginning. And when everything fell apart, the one person everyone dismissed would be the only one left standing strong. It started slowly at first, like tiny cracks in a dam that no one notices until the water comes rushing through. My uncle's business, the one he bragged about at every family dinner, suddenly stopped paying him the way it used to. The shiny new gadgets he loved showing off started piling up in the corner of his apartment because he couldn't resell them to cover his debts. He pretended everything was fine, but I could see the strain in his eyes. Then came my mom. I'll never forget the night I overheard her and my dad in the kitchen. Their voices were hushed, but sharp. My mom had been hiding thousands of dollars in credit card debt. She thought she could manage it quietly, but the interest was eating her alive. When my dad found out, the shouting match shook the walls of the house. The fights didn't stop there. Soon every phone call between my mom and her brothers turned into an argument. Who would help with the bills? Who would cover grandma's medical expenses? Who was spending too much? The same siblings who used to laugh and chat around the dinner table could barely stay in the same room together without screaming. And in the middle of it all sat my grandma. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just watched. Sometimes, when everyone was yelling, I'd catch her eyes flicking from one child to another, her face unreadable. Almost like she was calculating, waiting. I tried to talk to her one night. I found her sitting in the living room, knitting quietly while the rest of the family tore each other apart in the kitchen. "Grandma," I whispered, "aren't you upset? They keep fighting and no one listens to you." She didn't look up from her knitting. Her hands moved steadily, looping yarn around needles as if the chaos around her didn't exist. Finally she said softly, "Vera, when people think they know everything, they stop listening. But storms have a way of humbling even the proudest hearts." I didn't fully understand her words then, but they stayed with me. Things went from bad to worse. Bills piled up on the counter. Collection agencies started calling. The house, the one my grandparents had worked so hard to buy decades ago, was suddenly in danger of being taken away. My uncles stopped visiting unless it was to argue. My mom was constantly on edge, snapping at everyone. My dad grew distant, tired of the constant battles. Even the cousins started avoiding family gatherings, embarrassed by the drama. Our family was falling apart. And then something happened that none of us saw coming. Grandma spoke up. One evening, after another explosive fight, she asked us all to sit down in the living room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand. She just asked. Maybe it was the calm in her tone, or maybe we were all too exhausted to argue, but for the first time in weeks, the room went quiet. She looked at each of her children, her eyes steady. "I've let you speak over me for years. I've let you treat me as though I have nothing to offer. But the truth is, I've seen this storm coming for a long time. And I am not going to sit by and watch my family fall apart." My uncle scoffed. "Mom, what are you going to do? You can't fix this. It's too late." But Grandma didn't flinch. She set down her knitting needles and said, "I've lived 72 years. I've survived things you can't even imagine. Don't you dare tell me what I can or cannot fix." The room went silent. For the first time, I saw a flicker of respect and maybe even fear in my uncle's eyes. That night, Grandma started making phone calls. Not frantic ones, like the rest of us. Calm, steady calls to old friends and connections she had built over a lifetime. A woman she used to work with at the hospital. A neighbor whose son was now a lawyer. Even an old church friend who ran a small bank branch. Piece by piece, she began stitching together solutions. She negotiated payment extensions. She found programs that could ease the medical costs. She convinced a creditor to cut the interest on my mom's debt. She even uncovered a small savings account none of us knew she had, money she'd tucked away quietly for a rainy day. And it wasn't just about money. She spoke to my cousins, the ones drifting toward the wrong crowd. She didn't yell or threaten. She just listened, and then shared stories from her own youth, stories of temptation, mistakes, and redemption. For the first time in months, I saw my cousins sit in silence, their phones forgotten, their eyes wide as they listened to her. It was like the entire family had forgotten who she was. We had all looked at her and seen someone frail, someone irrelevant. But now, in the middle of our chaos, she was becoming the anchor we didn't know we needed. Still, not everyone was convinced. My uncle muttered behind her back, "She's wasting her time. She'll never fix this mess." My mom shook her head and whispered, "She doesn't understand how complicated things are these days." But I believed her. For the first time, I could see the quiet fire in her eyes. This wasn't a woman giving up. This was a woman preparing to prove every single one of them wrong. And as the days passed, I noticed something else: the cracks in our family weren't just financial, they were emotional. We had stopped trusting each other. We had stopped listening. Grandma knew it too. One night, as the fights began to break out again, she raised her voice louder than I had ever heard. "Enough," she shouted. Everyone froze. She stood tall, her back straight, her eyes blazing. "You think money is your only problem? No. The problem is pride. The problem is arrogance. And if you don't put that aside, you will lose more than this house, you will lose each other." No one said a word. I had never seen my family so quiet, so stunned. In that moment, I realized Grandma wasn't just trying to save our home. She was trying to save us. And little by little, her plan started to work. But none of us were prepared for how far she was willing to go. The shift didn't happen overnight, but when it came, it was undeniable. Grandma's quiet planning started turning into results. The creditors who once threatened my mom with lawsuits suddenly agreed to reduced payments, thanks to a deal Grandma had personally negotiated. The bills stacked on the kitchen counter began to shrink as programs she found offered relief we never knew existed. My uncle, stubborn as ever, resisted at first. But when Grandma revealed she had connected with one of his old business contacts who was willing to give him a second chance if he changed his ways, he finally sat down and listened. And my cousins? The ones who spent more time with their phones than their family? I watched them lean closer every time Grandma spoke. She didn't just scold them, she told them about her youth, the temptations she had faced, and the mistakes she refused to let them repeat. For the first time in months, they respected someone. And that someone wasn't their parents, it was their grandmother. It was like watching the sun rise after a stormy night. Slowly, the family began to shift. But the true moment of redemption came when everything boiled to the surface. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of day when family arguments usually reached their peak. My mom and her brothers were at it again, voices raised, blaming each other for the mess we were in. The air was heavy with resentment. That's when Grandma stood up. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She simply walked into the center of the room, her cane tapping lightly against the floor, and laid out every piece of paper she had gathered: the revised bills, the payment plans, the letters from her friends and contacts who had offered help. "Here," she said, her voice firm. "This is what I've done while you've been fighting. This is what you've called useless." No one spoke. She pointed at the stack of papers. "I am 72 years old. You dismissed me because you thought my time had passed. But while you argued, I worked. While you complained, I found solutions. While you ignored me, I saved you." My uncle's face turned red. My mom looked down at her hands. One by one, the fight drained out of them. Because there it was in black and white, the proof that the woman they had mocked had done more for this family in a few weeks than they had in years. But Grandma wasn't finished. She looked at each of them, her eyes sharp and steady. "Money can be replaced. A house can be rebuilt. But a family? Once it's broken, it may never heal. If you want to stay together, if you want to call yourselves a family, then you will listen. You will respect one another. And you will never again call me useless." The silence in that room was so thick, I could hear my own heartbeat. My mom began to cry. My uncle turned away, ashamed. Even my cousins looked down at their shoes. And for the first time in a long time, I saw them not as stubborn adults or careless children, but as people humbled, broken, and ready to listen. Grandma didn't gloat. She didn't rub it in. She simply returned to her chair, picked up her knitting, and began again, as though nothing had happened. But we all knew everything had changed. From that day forward, things were different. My mom worked harder to be transparent with my dad. My uncle swallowed his pride and accepted help, rebuilding his finances step by step. My cousins stopped rolling their eyes and started helping around the house, listening more than they spoke. And at the center of it all was Grandma Evelyn, the woman they once mocked, the woman they once dismissed, the woman they once called useless, but not anymore. For me, as her granddaughter, the transformation was unforgettable. I realized I had always known her worth, but now the entire family finally saw it too. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about saving the house. It was about restoring respect, reminding us all that wisdom doesn't fade with age and that strength can come in the quietest, most unexpected forms. I still remember the words she whispered to me one night as we sat together after dinner, the house finally calm again. She smiled gently and said, "Vera, people only see what they want to see. They thought I was finished. But sometimes, life saves the sweetest victories for the ones who are most underestimated." And she was right. Because in the end, her revenge wasn't in shouting back at those who belittled her. Her revenge was proving them wrong with dignity, patience, and power they could never deny. They called her useless, but in the end, she saved the whole family. And I'll never forget it. So, to everyone listening, if you've ever had someone underestimate you, or if you've seen a loved one treated as though they were nothing, I want you to share your story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, because more stories of betrayal, family drama, and the sweet taste of karma are on the way.